The chamber was carved from living crystal, vast enough to swallow cities. Yet it fell silent the moment the humans stepped inside. Delegates from 100 worlds turned as one. Spines stiffening, frills dimming, mandibles clicking shut. He wore no armor, no insignia, no visible weapon. His clothing was plain, functional, scarred by old burns and stitched repairs. Still, the air tightened around him as if gravity itself had learned fear. He walked with the economy of someone long accustomed to danger, every step measured, every sense awake. Scars traced his hands like maps of forgotten wars, and his posture carried a readiness that no ceremonial guard could imitate. His eyes moved constantly, noting exits, shadows, distances. He did not look impressed, intimidated, or lost. He looked prepared. That, more than anything, unsettled the chamber. Among the alien delegates, recognition spread faster than speech. An elder of the Virex fold recoiled, membranes paling. A car sentinel lowered its plasma staff in a reflex older than doctrine. Even the towering Alothi war mind, bred for conquest, inclined its armored head by a fraction. None of them asked who he was. They already knew what he represented. The human stopped at the center of the chamber and waited. He did not demand attention. He did not need to. Silence bent toward him, heavy with memory. Somewhere in the high galleries, translators struggled to keep up with the murmurs rippling through alien throats. Words emerged in fragments, layered with old fear and reluctant respect. Human, unmarked, survivor. For the man, the whispers were meaningless noise. He had learned long ago to tune out fear that was not his own. His thoughts were elsewhere, anchored to a simple truth that had followed him across star systems and battlefields alike. Humanity had been invited into the galaxy with smiles and treaties. It had been welcomed, studied, tested, and finally used. When the wars came, humans had been placed where casualties were expected, where losses were acceptable. He had watched allies become overseers, then jailers, then executioners. That was the conflict that had brought him here. Not revenge, though he carried enough grief to justify it. Not conquest, though he understood war better than most species understood peace. He was here because the same council now debating his presence was preparing to erase what remained of his people's independence. Earth stood on the edge of becoming a managed world, its fate decided by beings who believe humans useful but expendable. A slender, many-eyed delegate finally found its voice. The words echoed through the chamber, translated into a dozen forms of sound and light. "Why have you come alone?" The question carried disbelief, calculation, and a hint of dread. The human lifted his gaze, meeting eyes that had never before met a human without a muzzle or chains. He said nothing. His silence was deliberate, a pause sharpened by experience. He had learned that letting others speak first revealed more than any interrogation. In that pause, memories surfaced unbidden. Training under crushing oceans, lungs burning as instructors waited to see who would quit. Brothers who had laughed, bled, and died beside him, their names etched deeper into him than any dog tag. Missions where surrender meant extinction, and survival meant adaptation. He had survived all of it, not because he was the strongest, but because he refused to break. The council mistook his silence for calculation, perhaps even negotiation. They did not yet understand that the decision had already been made long before he entered the chamber. He was not here to ask permission or plead for mercy. He was here to remind the galaxy of a lesson it had tried to forget. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, roughened by years of disuse, yet it carried without amplification. He told them he had come because humans were done being spoken for. He told them he had come because every threat they imagined had already been tested against his kind. Most of all, he told them he had come alone so they would understand one thing clearly. If a single unarmed human could make the galaxy hesitate, then humanity was not weak. It was restrained. And restraint, once abandoned, could not be recalled. The realization unsettled them more than any display of force. Restraint implied choice, and choice implied a future the council could no longer fully control. As the chamber lights dimmed in reactive caution, the human remained still, patient as a drawn breath, somewhere beyond the crystal walls. Fleets were repositioning, policies rewriting themselves in panic. The man sensed it without seeing. This was always the moment that mattered most, the fragile second before fear decided whether to become understanding or violent, and he waited to see which path the galaxy would take. Next, the Council's hesitation bought time, and time invited memory. As the delegates whispered and recalculated, the human allowed his mind to move backward, to the long road that had shaped him into the figure now unsettling an empire of stars. He had not been born a symbol. He had been forged through repetition, failure, and loss, like every other soldier his world produced when survival demanded it. On Earth, oceans had been his first teachers. Cold water crushed the breath from his lungs while instructors watched without sympathy, waiting to see who would surface and who would sink. He learned that panic wasted oxygen, and that pain, properly understood, was only information. The men beside him learned the same lesson, and together they became something harder than individuals. They became a unit that trusted silence more than words and preparation more than hope. When humanity reached the stars, that unit was sent where diplomacy thinned and violence waited. Officially, they were advisors, peacekeepers, partners. In practice, they were deployed as solutions to problems other species did not want to solve themselves. The human remembered the first betrayal clearly, because it had been dressed as necessity. A treaty revised, an extraction delayed, a corridor left unguarded. Half his team never made it home. After that, survival stopped being theoretical. He adapted, as humans always did. He studied alien habits, hierarchies, fears. He learned which species respected strength, which respected cunning, and which respected only results. Armor failed. Technology failed. What endured was will, and the willingness to act when every calculation said retreat. He moved through enemy territory without markings because markings made targeting easier. He carried no dog tags because memory was weight enough. Stories began to circulate, though he never heard them firsthand. An unarmed human walking into secured zones and leaving with prisoners. Supply lines collapsing after a single night of silence. Commanders found bound, alive and ashamed. He did not kill when killing served no purpose. He did not spare when sparing endangered others. Every choice was measured against one constant: no one left behind. The galaxy noticed patterns long before it understood motives. Worlds that abused human auxiliaries suffered inexplicable setbacks. Camps holding human laborers lost power, then control. Ships transporting captives arrived empty. The human never claimed responsibility, but his presence lingered like a pressure change, warning of a storm already overhead. In the council chamber, a projection ignited, displaying records long suppressed. Casualty numbers spiked wherever humans were deployed as expendable assets. Resource treaties skewed toward non-human profit. Migration corridors redirected away from Earth. The central conflict crystallized not as a single grievance, but as a history of decisions made without consequence. Until now, the human listened as accusations formed, as justifications followed. He recognized the tone. It was the same tone commanders used before sacrificing a unit for strategic advantage. Calm, reasonable, distant. He had learned to hear the cause behind such voices, and he knew who would pay it if nothing changed. A memory surface of a burning outpost, alien and human bodies indistinguishable in death. He had dragged 3 survivors from the wreckage, while orbital fire turned the horizon white. No medals followed, only reassignment and silence. That had been the moment he understood that recognition was never guaranteed, but responsibility was. He raised his head slightly, enough to signal attention without demand. The movement drew every gaze back to him. He was no longer only a man recounting the past. He was evidence standing in the present. The council sensed it, the weight of accumulated consequence pressing against protocol. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet signal that events were accelerating beyond rehearsal. This was the same sensation that preceded breached doors and collapsing plans, the moment when preparation surrendered to choice. He did not fear it. He respected it. Fear distracted, but respect sharpened focus. Around him, alien minds weighed probabilities, unaware that humans had long ago learned to operate when probability offered no comfort at all. Experience had taught him that hesitation killed more surely than any weapon, and that decisive action, even imperfect, often carved the only path left open to survival when all others closed completely. He spoke again, not in anger, but with a clarity that stripped away pretense. Humanity would no longer accept roles designed for its erasure. Cooperation required consent, and survival required respect. These were not threats. They were conditions. The chamber absorbed his words slowly, like heat into stone. Outside, fleets still waited and decisions still loomed. Inside, the human stood as he always had, balanced between restraint and action. The next move would not be his alone, but he was ready for it. And the galaxy, whether it wished to be or not, would have to respond. The Council's response came not as a shout or decree, but as movement. Seats shifted, limbs folded, light patterns altered in colors that signaled unease across species. The human recognized the signs instantly. They were preparing for containment, not dialogue. He had seen it before on worlds where fear masqueraded as procedure. A ring of guardians advanced from the chamber's perimeter, weapons humming with restrained power. They moved carefully, aware that any misstep might ignite something none of them could extinguish. The human did not step back. His hands remained open at his sides, fingers relaxed, posture neutral. To the untrained eye, he appeared vulnerable. To those who had studied humans long enough, he looked dangerous. One delegate, older than most, addressed him with a voice layered in centuries. It demanded assurance, proof that humanity's restraint was real, that this lone figure was not merely bait for retaliation. The human listened, then nodded once, acknowledging the question without conceding its premise. He began to speak, and as he did, images surfaced in the chamber's air, drawn from verified records the Council could not dismiss. A human evacuation corridor held against overwhelming force by a handful of volunteers. A supply station rebuilt by human engineers while under fire. A ceasefire honored by humans even after it had been violated repeatedly. Each scene carried the same pattern. Loss endured without surrender. The Guardians hesitated, their advance slowing. The human continued, his voice steady, unadorned. He explained that humans learned early the cost of escalation. On their own world, they had nearly erased themselves discovering how far violence could go. Survival had not come from dominance, but from restraint tempered by resolve. When pushed beyond that line, however, humans responded completely. A murmur spread, sharper now, tinged with something like awe. The Council had expected bravado or threat. Instead, they were being offered context, an explanation of behavior that did not seek approval. The human was not defending himself. He was defining boundaries. The oldest delegate conferred with others in rapid, private exchange. The chamber's light dimmed further, reacting to heightened energy output beyond its walls. Fleets were moving. The human felt it as a pressure behind his eyes, the awareness of approaching inevitability. This was the pivot, the moment where words either held or failed. A final image appeared, unprompted by him, but drawn from shared archives. It showed a battlefield where an unarmored human stood between civilians and advancing fire, refusing evacuation until the last transport launched. He recognized the scene, though he had never seen it recorded. That had been the day his name ceased to matter. From then on, he had been an example. Silence followed, profound and searching. The Guardians halted, weapons lowered by fractional degrees. The Council faced an uncomfortable truth. The human before them was not an anomaly. He was representative. The oldest delegate spoke again, slower now. It proposed a compromise cloaked as mercy, suggesting monitored autonomy for Earth in exchange for disarmament and oversight. It framed the offer as protection. The human almost smiled. Almost. He shook his head once. The refusal was absolute. He said that humans did not require guardianship, nor would they accept survival purchased by submission. He said that every concession demanded so far had only invited further demands. The pattern was clear, and humans had learned to break patterns when they led to extinction. Tension spiked, sharp enough to taste. For a heartbeat, violence hovered, waiting for permission. The human shifted his weight subtly, aligning himself with the chamber's geometry, calculating trajectories he hoped not to use. He was prepared to die here if that was the cost of clarity. He had accepted that long before entering the room. Then something changed. The Guardians withdrew fully. The Council's light stabilized. The oldest delegate inclined its form in a gesture that translated universally as acknowledgement, if not agreement. It declared that hostilities would be suspended pending reevaluation. Not peace, but pause. In the galaxy's history, that alone was unprecedented. The human exhaled slowly, tension easing without disappearing. He understood this was not an ending. It was an opening, narrow and fragile. As he stood alone in the center of the chamber, unarmed and unmarked, he felt the weight of countless futures shifting. The galaxy had blinked first. What followed would determine whether that blink became understanding or merely the calm before something far worse. He knew restraint had bought only time, never certainty, yet time was the rarest currency of all. Somewhere, humans would feel the change without knowing why. Somewhere else, fear would harden into plans. He turned inward, steadying himself. The next decision would demand more than presence. It would demand choice, and choice would demand cost. He accepted that cost without hesitation, because hesitation had saved anyone. The pause became policy faster than anyone expected. Fleets slowed, then stopped, their formations loosening as if the galaxy itself had exhaled. Orders were revised, language softened, contingencies shelved rather than erased. The Council issued statements that spoke of cooperation and reassessment, careful words designed to save face while avoiding provocation. None of it surprised the human. He had seen institutions retreat before, not out of conscience, but out of uncertainty. He remained in the chamber until dismissed, standing through procedural formalities that now felt almost ceremonial. No restraints were placed on him. No escort followed as he departed. The message was clear enough. They were still afraid to touch him. As he walked away, crystal doors parting soundlessly, he felt a familiar weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a quieter burden. Influence carried consequences whether one sought it or not. News traveled unevenly, filtered through channels humans barely monitored. On Earth, analysts noted shifts in trade pressure and military posture without understanding their origin. Soldiers on distant fronts felt rules change subtly in their favor. Camps grew less crowded. Supply lines stabilized. None of them knew a single unarmed man had stood in a chamber of enemies and refused to bend. The human did not return home. He never had. Home, for him, existed in fragments carried between deployments, in the memory of voices lost to vacuum and fire. Instead, he moved on, as he always did, slipping back into obscurity where he was most effective. He avoided recognition, declined debriefings, and erased trails as carefully as others sought to create them. His purpose had never been to lead humanity, only to keep its options open. The Council convened again without him. Debates continued, slower now, weighted by caution. Records once hidden were examined openly. Histories rewritten themselves under scrutiny. The myth of human expendability eroded as data replaced assumption. It was not justice, but it was movement, and movement mattered. Some delegates argued for renewed control, convinced restraint was temporary. Others urged accommodation, having glimpsed the cost of miscalculation. Fear had not vanished. It had matured. Fear, when matured, could become respect, and respect could become coexistence. The human had not promised either outcome. He had only demonstrated possibility. In quiet moments, he allowed himself memory. Faces surfaced, unbidden, of those who should have been there to see this shift. He honored them not with ceremony, but with continuation. Every step forward was taken in their absence, and because of it, he carried them as proof that sacrifice demanded meaning, even if meaning arrived late. The galaxy adjusted around him, never fully aware of his proximity. Worlds recalibrated defenses. Policies softened at the edges. Humans were no longer placed automatically at the front of unwinnable conflicts. It was not equality, but it was no longer erasure. The human understood incremental change. Sudden transformation invited backlash. Survival favored patience paired with readiness. He remained ready. Readiness had become his default state, as natural as breath. He trained alone, observed quietly, intervened only when necessary. Each action was measured against the same internal metric, he had always used. Would this preserve choice? Would this prevent another forced silence? Sometimes he wondered how long restraint could hold. Humanity's history suggested limits. Pressure accumulated, lines blurred, tempers frayed. He knew that one day, someone else might stand where it stood, unarmed and unmarked, and choose differently. That future was not his to control, only to influence. As he traveled through a neutral port, unnoticed among thousands, a child of another species stared at him with open curiosity rather than fear. The human met the gaze briefly, then looked away. Change began like that, unannounced and fragile. He moved on, carrying no symbols, claiming no victories. The galaxy would remember the moment, even if it forgot the man. That was enough. The pause he had carved out still held, tension balanced but unbroken. Somewhere ahead, another decision waited, another line yet to be tested. Until then, he walked on, a reminder that restraint was not weakness, and that sometimes the most dangerous force in the universe was a being who chose, again and again, not to strike first.